Welcome to Unique History Channel. Today we're going to be reading part 2 of My Struggle by Vladimir ZHIRINOVSKY, Learning About Life. Politics, like art, is not for everyone. True, anyone can attend a meeting, offer observations, or propose a slogan. However, a deep involvement in politics requires knowledge of the humanities, histories, economics, philosophy, and law. It requires aptitude along a wish to immerse oneself in the subject. Just as an artist cannot do without an easel, a person involved in politics has to formulate and express ideas to see if they meet with approval. Without recognition, there is no politician. An artist can find the recognition after death, but a person involved in politics must receive a recognition while still alive or forever be forgotten. An artist can leave pictures behind, a writer unpublished work, but a politician is a person of the moment who must exist always in the present tense. I devoted everything to my studies and soon graduated from the Institute for Asian and African Countries. Many graduates didn't want to enter the army, but being politically ambitious, I felt that the military service would help me, if only with my resume, and to avoid questions why I had not performed in this important institution of public life. I served as a lieutenant in the political administration of the military headquarters for Caucasus when Vladimir ZHIRINOVSKY was still in charge of Georgia. The last Georgian Tsar, ZHIRINOVSKY, was the first secretary to the Central Committee of the Georgian Communist Party. Thus I experienced corruption and cronyism in their fullest bloom. By the time Vladimir ZHIRINOVSKY was appointed in 1972, tried to introduce order into Georgian life, I had already left. My years in the army were useful. They taught me about the military mind, political work, various aspects of propaganda and reconnaissance, and the nationality question. In the Caucasus, which is different from Central Asia, I noticed that no Soviet rule existed. There were no genuine communists in the leadership. Instead, pseudo-communism prevailed. I also noticed the South was the hotbed of the nation's troubles. Indeed, all of Russia's troubles aspiring from the South. Unless we resolve the Southern question, we will never be free from a proactive and periodically reoccurring crisis. I couldn't find an apartment, since it would have been too costly to live in a hotel. I appealed for help to the members of the military council, to my boss, and to others. Finally, I ended up paying 3 rubles to live in a communal apartment building with the familiar large corridors, common kitchens, and toilets. I shared one of its rooms with Vladimir Mikhaila, a Ukrainian graduate of the Institute for Special Communications in Sumy, where specialists are trained. For nearly 2 years, we shared a room, but during the last several months, I lived alone. I got to know Georgia immediately and spent time in Armenia and southern Ossetia observing the life, customs, and cultures of the people. For some inexplicable reason, I had no desire to learn their language and ended up only knowing 2 or 3 common phrases. My heart wasn't into studying their language, probably because I felt discriminated against in Alma-Ata and Turkey, where Kazakh and Turkish tongues held sway. I studied this region, Turkey, Iran, the Middle East, and the Arab world, going on business trips, giving lectures to the troops, writing leaflets, knowing that a deeper understanding of the inner processes in a country and its foreign affairs would help my overall development. Before long, I was a specialist, an Orientalist who could boast of the practical experiences with Turkey, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. The experience gave me a deeper understanding of the Muslim region and its problems. I began my civilian service in May 1973, and I managed to save enough money to return to Moscow with the first payment for a co-op apartment in my pocket. But then I was married and living with my wife's parents. They helped us attain the apartment in which we moved into with our young son. The first floor apartment had no telephone. It was cold, far away, and inconvenient on the outskirts of Moscow in a region called Teplistan, with no nearby subway or movie theater. We ended up exchanging the apartment for one in a different building. I enrolled at Moscow University's evening division and studied foreign languages, striving for a greater knowledge, especially of social problems. I tackled the problem of housing. I examined workers' collectives, trades committees, party committees, leadership, Communist Party congresses, and the new 1977 Constitution. All this deep study hardened me without turning me into a dissident. Studying helped me create a political personality. They saw shortcomings, blunders, mistakes in the state, and yet harbored no bitterness towards ordinary communists. Indeed, I grasped they too were workers and not enemies of our country. Many of them I knew had been obligated to join the party. Without a party card, they could not receive permission to study or get a particular job. Indeed, without a party card, I myself encountered obstacles in climbing the job ladder in my graduate studies at a particular academy. Nearly every avenue was closed to me, a non-party member made to exist in the world of apartheid, in the position of a second-class citizen. Nor was our capital free of political oppression. My designation was NP, non-party, even though I was in one way or another associated with the state apparatus and central institutions because of my education, and the NP designation still doomed me to second-class status. Personal officials put my application to the side as soon as they saw NP written on the line inquiring about party membership. As an NP, I was like a person of another race or caste. My second profession, law, now proved especially useful. I worked at the MRI publishing house, first as a staff lawyer and then as the head of the legal department, but even in this position, my NP designation made me feel less than a full-fledged employee, and I was often forced to leave the party meeting when its closed portion began. This discrimination was very unpleasant. But every brick in this negative wall only served to create a solid foundation for my political activity. By the time I was 30, I wanted to join a new political party. I dreamed that this party would have its own representatives in Parliament, and that I would head up the parliamentary opposition as a faction of my party. I dreamed about getting into a ministerial post in the future, and it was no soldier's vain dream of becoming a general. Indeed, I had seen people in their surroundings and noticed their inability to govern. I saw dull-witted or merely stupid people who achieved high positions only because of party loyalty. A multi-party system, I was sure, would give greater opportunities to be talented. My initial goal was therefore to launch or become the member of a party to represent it with the seat in Parliament and making it into the ruling party. In pursuing this dream, I had no fanaticism about achieving some personal high station. Indeed, my only fanaticism was an idea which I stood, that in our country all should equally enjoy a good life. Even though I had been deprived of freedom to work where I desired, I was not goaded into seeking revenge. Because I was NP, I might have been blocked from the opportunity to become a diplomat or to work at the institution like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but I was still prepared to find myself another field where I would use my skills. So when my opponents occasionally snipe, where on earth did he come from? We know little about him. Such an educated fellow, speaker of European languages with 2 university degrees, where did this relic of 19th century Russia come from? If I, in the last several years, had occupied a particular place in Russia's political horizon, it was naturally a consequence of my past life, of my southern birth and upbringing, and of my military service in the Caucasus, and my education in law and foreign languages. After the army, I went to work at the Peace Committee at the Division of International Relationships for Western countries, where by chance there was the opening consultant who knew French. Because French was not a popular language in Moscow, finding a specialist who knew the language was difficult. I hired, having just finished my military service, and with my work experience in politics, still a member of the Commissal, I considered myself fortunate to have found such a position. Working with delegations from such countries as France, Belgium, Switzerland, and Italy, I was able to study the West as a region. In the summer of the very year, I participated in a peace congress in Moscow and the International Youth and Students Festival in Berlin. I threw myself into serious political work, immersing myself in the widest contexts. While still studying at the Institute for Asian and African Countries, I had worked with many different organizations, including friendship societies and various delegations, and frequent contacts with foreigners who studied at Lennon Hills at the university. I wanted very much then to share a room with a French person, or at least to live the same block with one, but I was forced instead to spend a year with a Mongol. The student office once offered to sign me to a block with Italians, but believing Italian was unnecessary, I turned down the offer. To shame, a knowledge of Italian would serve me well today. In any case, seeking to improve my language skills, wanted to live in close contact, even if not in the same room, with a foreign student. Indeed, it should be plain by now that a foreign element has perpetrated my life since nationality. I have been surrounded by different nationalities. I can therefore relate to an assortment of cultures, civilizations, and psychologies. I cannot allow myself to become a closed-minded chauvinist whose vision is limited by a narrow national background. Instead, I favor the widest possibility of development with no violence, domination, or discrimination against any particular nation. My view is a global one. I have come to realize that we are citizens of the same planet. I have even frequent contacts with organizations such as World Federacists who 20 or 30 years ago had begun to advocate with the idea of a common European home. Max Hobbit, a Swiss lawyer who ran for president of the Swiss Confederations, is among my good acquaintances. He invited me to be his house guest, but it was difficult to visit someone in a capitalist country other than a relative. Our contacts therefore were confined for the most part to his visits to Moscow, where he gave me his literature. In the army, there is also a foreign slant to my work. I studied the Middle East, the West, and other regions, even at the MRI publishing house, where I worked in the years before I seriously entered politics. I mingled with foreigners and conducted agreements with foreign firms. This work was easy for me because I had studied Western ways. In the end, my employment helped to shape my worldview. Case in point is my knowledge of economics. By examining workers' collectives, I came to grasp the economics problems of our country. Once in school, I went to work at a kolkhoz, or a collective farm. In addition, I performed work study at the factory. These experiences schooled me in the practical side of economics, teaching me lessons not only from textbooks but from factories, agricultural empires, various institutions, business throughout the countries from Ishmael to Calcutta. I knew our country well. I know its people, where they dwell, their religion, their ways of life, their problems. I have seen our country from near and far, and would come to know its people through conversations held on trains, buses, and airplanes. Without showing off, I could say that I possess a certain wisdom. In contrast, some 25-year-old kids who have done nothing more than read a lot of books on political theory regard themselves as politicians. Perhaps they will eventually become politicians, but a youth who has graduated from medical institute is not yet a surgeon until he gains experience. Likewise, for a politician, experience is crucial and has no shortcuts. To cover every subject, know everything, and obtain a broad education by all 28 or 29 is impossible. The world is simply too complicated. The maturity and wisdom necessary for making decisions and taking responsibility for them come at about 40. Studying politics as an academic subject is one thing. Being a working politician capable of making decisions is quite another. Many who consider themselves politicians are mere dilettantes. Boys can't find themselves football players or first-class athletes just because they play football in a courtyard of a small town. A crop duster is not entitled to call himself a cosmonaut, nor is a nurse who handles surgical implements automatically transformed into a head surgeon. The nurse has to play an important role, but it's the surgeon who saves the patient. Politics sometimes require decision-making on a grand scale, as for example, in the crisis at the Forhost, which occurred in August 1991, where Mikhail Gorbachev. During those privileged moments, everything depended on Gorbachev. Had he acted differently, everything could have turned out differently. The episode in our history demonstrates that a politician in a high government post cannot merely be an average worker. Politics, which affects lives of millions, is undoubtedly the result of occupations. Because of the great nuclear powers such as Russia, the United States of America, or China, political decisions are global in their impact and can have stupendous effect on the fate of the entire planet. There's no room for a lightweight politician. Too many young people today are dabbing at creating new parties that they reflect the fashion of the day. I've got my own party, they say. I'm its leader. We have our own newspaper and our own Congress. We demand so-and-so's resignation, but this is playing at politics will end disappear like foam. 5 or 6 parties are enough to express the leading political forces in any country. 40, 50, or 100 parties cannot last. These many parties have bubbled up because people want to express themselves, especially in our country that has been ruled so long by one party. Given such a long period of one-party rule, it's natural for an extreme multi-party phase to follow. But in the end, a healthy contraction will occur. It will leave us with 3 or 4 or 5 political parties, a number sufficient to express the essential political views of the people. I believe that politics is such a useful and noble and dangerous undertaking at education of its practical essential. Among the new party leaders in Russia are an electrician, a construction worker, a chess player, a writer, and a biologist. I always ask myself, with surprise after reading their biographies, how can this person so narrowly educated, trained, and be involved in politics, which requires the widest possible background? A broad range of knowledge in philosophy, history, philology, literature, sociology, law, and political science is required in politics. One needs to study many subjects to have the talent of a journalist, writer, leader, and orator, to know foreign languages, understand the economic problems, ecology and childhood education, grasp the work of the law enforcement agencies, and state security. A political leader must be knowledgeable in all areas, including having an understanding of religious issues, to possibly do machine work one day and the head of a political party the next. Such a party won't be around for long. Still, all individuals who think they are capable of leading the government have the right to found their own party. There's nothing stopping such an ambition. Indeed, I have the greatest respect for Viktor Ivanovich Kaganovich Barshov and the writer Eduard Levinov, who others tried to lead the various political groups. Yet, I still believe that it would be better if people were stuck at what they're good at. Russia has already and infrequently been governed by technically specialists. Alexei Kozin, for example, received a degree from a textile institute, and other leaders come from metallurgical, agricultural, and marketing background. Russia's leadership, however, has never included individuals fluent in European languages and knowledgeable before assuming power about foreign lands. In fact, many hardly knew their own country before discovering it at the age of 60. I have always believed and still believe that family and home should be the primary business for a woman and wife, but my wife, who is a lawyer, was compelled to work in those years, and then today the man of the house cannot earn enough to provide well for his family. Yet, because it is my view that it is a man's affair in which a woman should never engage, I still have always tried to shield my life from my political activities. Today, with my family at risk, I do it so more than ever. Because of my deep involvement in politics, I belong to my family only on Sundays. The rest of my week belongs to the party where I work 16 hours a day. I no longer have any other employment. Politics is my profession and practice mainly through the Liberal Democratic Party that I have. I am frequently asked about my means of support. The Liberal Democratic Party comprises more than 80,000 members who contribute 1% of their monthly salaries for due, a portion of which is channeled to the party's headquarters. These dues and other donations are used to publicize the party's program and ideas. I spend only the minimum myself and a far greater share on the maintenance of the headquarters and its staff. Wages for staff members who would rather work in the capacity of fellow thinkers or as hired help are quite low. Some of our staff members work in headquarters in addition to holding jobs with the state or private enterprises. A significant amount of our money is spent on travel around the country and mainly for transportation, since room and board are usually provided by our hosts. Party publications, the Liberal and ZHIRINOVSKY's Falcon, are self-supporting. Even though they sell for only about 12 to 15 rubles, these publications are produced at the party's headquarters using voluntary resources. Authors do not seek honoraria. Professional editors, confirmed believers in the party program, work for free. Since our party has no hard currency when we go abroad, our way is paid by the hosts as a rule. They cover not only our accommodations but also our round-trip transportation. Any fees we receive for television appearances, articles, and reviews are used to obtain technical equipment for publicizing our message and are spent on other expenses, mainly clothing, and allow us to dress appropriately for meetings and receptions. As they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Practically all of my time is devoted to party work, where I tackle my colleagues from early morning. I read the growing amount of incoming mail, meet with out-of-town representatives, and plan and organize functions as conferences, meetings, and demonstrations. I consider it my duty to be present at political events, to receive information directly and thus avoid second-hand distortions. Typically, if no political events are scheduled, I spend the middle of the day prearranged on carefully scheduled interviews, many with representatives of the foreign press, television, and radio. The end of the day is set up for the groups' meetings of the party's shadow government, the Supreme Council, the Publications Council, and other bodies. I usually spend evenings preparing speeches and conducting detailed review of the foreign domestic news broadcast on television and, most importantly, on the radio. My knowledge of foreign languages I learn about and therefore take into account not only foreign Russian language propaganda prepared especially for us, but also the broadcast in our language that are intended for native listeners. The disparity between information in the foreign broadcast versus the local Russian ones is also tremendous. For example, in professing sympathy on the disintegration of the USSR, U.S. President George Bush also expressed his deep satisfaction at the casual collapse of our mighty state, which had been simulated by the distant abroad. Without embarrassment, he flatly stated that the upheaval was clearly in the interest of the United States. Receiving information firsthand enables me better to predict political trends and prepare appropriate responses to events occurring abroad as well as at home. Despite the terrible period of our country continues to experience, and despite the crisis of authority which we are now living in, Russia remains a strong enough power, even with the United States striving for world domination, cannot ignore it. The constant unrelenting political activity is a burden that takes serious toll on my personal life and deprives me of the opportunity to unwind and spend relaxed time with my relatives and friends. Even so, my family ties have not been weakened. My mother lived her final years with me. My older brother, a retired serviceman who I stayed with when I worked for my university exam, assists me in my complex work. My sister, who recently lived in Ulyanovsk with her son, works at our headquarters. In 1992, she became a victim of crime created by our pseudo-democracy. Apparently, the Ulyanovsk mafia and other local criminals, absolutely convinced that political figures maintain their close relationship in luxury, targeted my sister, a woman who has never enjoyed any privileges and who lives on a humble salary. The bandits, using deception, and persuaded my nephew, then not 10 years old, to open the door, telling him they had a directive from the party for our mother, who was at work. Bursting into the apartment, they knocked him unconscious with a blow to the head and ransacked the apartment. They got the old clothes and old shoes, as well as some change on the floor, all but 3 rubles and 40 kopecks. Fortunately, my nephew was not seriously injured and regained consciousness quickly. My sister was afraid to remain in Ulyanovsk because of her concerns for her son, who had seen the thieves' faces. Without even bothering to pack, she left immediately from Moscow. Now, my nephew works in party headquarters along with his mother, who's an assistant. My other relatives are scattered through Russia's still vast territory. Okay, thank you.